Right, so my name's Tim, I'm an alcoholic. So some questions came up during the break. The first one is, I think, a specific question coming out of the SA groups round here where, well, it's just south of here, where in Hackney and Stamford Hill, where you have a lot of people coming from a particular community, but this applies elsewhere as well. So that this applies with certain parts of London are associated with particular social groups, and that to do with class or sexuality or all sorts of things. And one of the difficulties that you can have in an AA group is that they can become cliquey, so that the group reflects a particular social demographic or a particular ethnic group or a particular this or a particular that. And what the traditions have to say on that, I've already touched upon this a tiny bit, about the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Whereas AA membership ought never depend on conformity. And tradition 6 is about not associating yourself with anything on the outside. So not associating yourself with if you come from a particular background or a particular religion, you leave that background and the religion, the ideas from that background at the door. In Al-Anon, it's very interesting. They actually have a pamphlet on this. A lot of people go to Al-Anon. Does anyone else here go to Al-Anon?
I've been once.
Anyone else? Okay. It's very interesting. If you're alcoholics or addicts in your life, then Al-Anon might help. If you qualify for a 12-step fellowship, you're going to be surrounded by alcoholics and addicts the whole time. So you end up qualifying for Al-Anon even if you didn't already. If you have no one in your family is an alcoholic or an addict, a few months in here, you'll be desperate for Al-Anon without even knowing it. You just think you're mad, but no, maybe you need Al-Anon. But one of the things they say in Al-Anon is you probably come into Al-Anon having been to some other 12-step fellowship and leave the hat of that fellowship at the door. So never mention in Al-Anon that you also go to AA, or you also go to NA, or you also go to SLA, or you also go to whatever. And so to leave those other things at the door is tradition 6. And tradition 10 talks about having no opinion on outside issues. And that works either positively or negatively. And whether one of the questions came in the break was about people bringing in old ideas of religion. And a really good example is, I know a friend of mine is a Jesuit priest. So he was ordained as a Jesuit priest in the 1970s. He's been in AA for 41 years now, and in Al-Anon for 39 years. And you'd think as a Jesuit priest he'd be going on about God a lot. He often doesn't use the word God in meetings. He only says higher power, because that's the language of, it talks, the most neutral language in the AA literature is talking about a higher power and not God. And I think the solution to this problem, if groups are getting cliquey so that it's going to be hard for people that are from different backgrounds to come in, there are a couple of lines from the big book which really help. The first one is on page, I won't be able to find it now. Oh, here we go. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So that whenever I'm sharing in an AA meeting, I always imagine that there is someone in the corner who is new to AA. How would I be able to communicate in such a way as to reach someone who's completely different from me, who has no experience of AA, who has all sorts of prejudices and predetermined ideas, to reach across the barriers and to talk? If you imagine talking to them as opposed to talking to your pals, it changes things completely. And one of the great principles of AA is to always put yourself in the other person's shoes. And it's here on page 90. And this is when you're 12th stepping someone. Have a talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. Get an idea of his behaviour, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. So when you've got a newcomer that walks into the room, and they're clearly from a different background or a different setting, different experiences, you put yourself in their shoes and you share in such a way as to try and reach them, and it solves the problems of difference. The other question which came up was about when you have a relatively small fellowship with in a particular area with maybe 24, 3 people going to meetings, and of course you want meetings every day, you need a meeting every day. And so you end up with 7 meetings in the area, 1 a night, with maybe 3 people at each one. And the risk is you all turn up and you think, oh, it's you again. Ugh. And you and that you know they're thinking the same about you. And you think, whatever I share, they've heard it 1,000 times before. Why are we here? And I think there are two answers to that. The first one, if you're in AA, there are a good 950 meetings in London a week, and public information is handled by intergroup and region and the national subcommittees, and some groups do public information, but AA is just going to get new people coming in without anyone in any group lifting a finger. If you're in a small fellowship and in your area there are 30, 40, 50 people there, if your efforts as a fellowship are focused on carrying the message of your fellowship to your entire community, you're going to be too busy working out how to do that to start getting. It takes the focus off yourself, and it takes the focus off each other, because you have a bigger project which is to help the huge numbers of people outside there. And if that's the focus of the fellowship as a whole, it changes the focus of the group. There's a line in A Vision for You where it talks, I think, where is it? Let's see if I can find it. It talks about the early AA meetings, where people were constantly thinking about how, I won't be able to find it, how they could carry this message to other people, how they could present this message to newcomers. And so the focus is not how we're going to help ourselves in this little group of 3 people, it's how can we carry this message to the outside world. In order to prepare for that, again, to take the focus off each other, one thing that you can do is think about group formats. So most groups of AA, I'm sure it's true with most other fellowships, someone does a chair at the beginning and speaks for about 15 minutes about this or that, and everyone else chips in and says, well, I've had this experience and I've had that experience. That gets really dull if there are only 30 of you. And you need something else to focus on. And so the aim is to, and Al-Anon has this problem a lot because it's a much smaller fellowship. So their solution is to have literature-based meetings. So most Al-Anon meetings are going to have some basis in the literature. Most good Al-Anon meetings anyway have some basis in the literature. And the way to handle a group format, if there are only 3 of you, rather than each of you just talking about your day for 20 minutes, that your basic format is this, and this is a group format for a small group in a small fellowship. You take a piece of literature, for instance, the Big Book, or the 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions, or The Language of the Heart is another good AA book, and you say, right, we're going to read a paragraph each. I'm going to read a paragraph, I'm going to share for 2 minutes. If anyone else wants to share on that paragraph, they come in. And then we read another paragraph and another paragraph. So you've got something for your mind to think about other than your day and your problems and your emotions and all of those things. It gives you some focus. And then if you're doing that and you're doing lots of public information work, there will be new people coming in. And that will give it energy. So you're not sitting there looking at each other for an hour a day, the same people. You're actually focusing on learning and developing ideas, and that will help your own recoveries as well. I found that when I go to loads of literature-based meetings and people are talking about the steps, it makes me work my own steps. If I'm not hearing about it in the meetings, it doesn't happen. So those are some ideas, and we can talk more about that afterwards. Any other thoughts before we go on to the topic of the traditions in other areas?
Yeah, I guess I'm adding. Let's say a few things, a few points. One is the topic you touched about being the small, not many people attending meetings, and how to create interest on the meetings instead of everyone repeating himself about the day. I think another problem of which you didn't touch is should we focus on building one meeting, which one or two good meetings a week, or have 7 meetings which are more week, because the experiences, and you might say that we can change it, is that if we have every day a meeting, it's not as strong as having 1 or 2 good meetings, which people are more committed, because somehow people are not committing to every night, So what happens is it gets weak. That's one point. Another point you said about in Al-Anon you've asked to leave your religious and your background and back when you come in. I find that I don't know what the balance is, because at the end of the day, when you come to a meeting and you share about your life, as you said, if you're religious or if you belong to someone, you go through some things which are related to that. So if you can't share about it, so you don't share about what's going on. You know what I mean? If I don't know if you understand what I mean.
No, I do. Yeah, that makes sense. Correct.
So if I give an example, I've been to AA meetings for Christmas, so they were talking about Christmas. Although it's not everyone, I don't know exactly, but it's something that's going on in their life. So they're talking about it, right? So I don't know what the balance is.
There's a really good point there about what you bring into your sharing and how you present it. And I got Tom, this a friend of mine gave me some incredibly helpful advice, which is whenever you're talking about what is going on out there, and what is going on out there, maybe you want to share about your job. One helpful thing when sharing about your job is to be, the phrase he uses is specific, not explicit. And that's actually, it's a helpful phrase for the Sex and Love Fellowships as well, to be specific about what is going on, but not so explicit that it triggers people. So you can talk about your job, you can talk about your family, you can talk about religious events you've been to, but you bring in details which are relevant to make the point. And the question is, how can I give enough detail so that people understand what I'm talking about without alienating people that don't identify? And the point about the leaving religion at the door, one of the things that I was at a meeting once where someone was saying, apart from being an alcoholic, I'm a recovering Catholic, and everyone laughed. And a friend of mine had brought a newcomer, and the newcomer was a very devout Catholic, and after the meeting they said, is it safe for me to come to AA as a Catholic, or am I going to get aggravation from people because I'm religious? So it works both. It's not just bringing pro-religious ideas into the meeting, it's bringing anti-religious ideas into the meeting. Both are against the traditions. So the question is, how can I communicate to anyone, whoever they are? And that's how I work out how to draw the line. The one thing about is it best to have one group one really strong meeting a week or 7. There are 2 ways of coming at it. Some parts of the world of recovery, they'll have a group which has multiple meetings. So the group will meet, but it's one group, but it meets several times a week. And the group has to be self-supporting across those different meetings. Others will say, no, each meeting is its own group. And then if you have the latter, so each meeting is its own group, each needs to be financially self-supporting, so it needs to be paying rent, it should never ever take free accommodation from somewhere. So if people appreciate it enough to put enough money in the pot to pay the rent, then that is the that will destroy, that principle destroys bad meetings and preserves good ones, because if people want it, they'll pay for it. If they don't want it enough to pay for it, the group folds automatically. So you never need to decide whether or not it's worth it. The finances will do it for you. But I think that's something for each of those like mini groups to ask. Is this the best way for us to carry the message? So if they have group consciences, no one can tell you what's best there, but that group can say, would it be best for us to dissolve this group and for us to attend other meetings and help make those strong? And you ask yourself, who are we reaching? Who are we talking to? Who are we helping?
Thank you. Another point you touched was saying by trying and working on a bigger on PI or bringing other people in. My question is, if it's a group of people who don't have much recovery, you know what I mean? So is it time to get some people in and saying to them what are the message we're gonna carry? That we're addicts and three of 5 people is the life shit. I mean, or could show them the big book. I mean,
where's the line? I'm trying to find. Here we go. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. One of the things about the way the program was designed originally back in the 1930s was the steps were designed to be done very quickly over a matter of weeks, not over 10 years, with the idea that you go through the first 9 steps in a few weeks. It will be rough and ready. You won't get every little detail. Every little bit of your childhood won't be examined to the nth degree. You know, you have the rest of your life to sort all of that stuff out, but you need to get some solid recovery under your belt. And when Bill and Bob started AA, when they got together in June 1935, within a few weeks of Bob getting sober, they were already at the hospital every day helping other alcoholics. So I suppose if you're saying, well, we haven't got enough recovery, I think the relevant word here is on page 63. When you've taken step 3, it says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action. So the action is all there to be taken. It can be taken quickly. So that's easily solved in a few weeks. If you as a group don't have enough recovery to be attractive under traditional 11 to the outside, sort it out. Doesn't take long. Just a matter of willingness. And I tell you, one thing that's interesting, it's on, is it 263? Yes. And that was lucky, I think, more than anything. Okay, so this is from one of the early AA members. It's the story he sold himself short. The day before I was due to go back to Chicago, this is a man who'd been introduced to AA, I think, in Cleveland or probably Akron, because it's Dr. Bob. So he'd heard about AA. He goes to visit Dr. Bob. This is mid-30s. The day before I was due to go back to Chicago, it was Dr. Bob's afternoon off. He had me to the office And this is the line which surprises people. And he had me to the office, and we spent 3 or 4 hours formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. The 6 steps were complete deflation, dependence and guidance from a higher power, moral inventory, confession, restitution, continued work with other alcoholics. Dr. Bob led me through all of these steps. At the moral inventory. Now so Dr. Bob is his sponsor at this point. He's known him for about 8 minutes, but he is his sponsor. At the moral inventory, that's Dr. Bob, brought up several of my bad personality traits or character defects. Wouldn't you just love a sponsor that you've only just met them and they tell you what your defects of character are? Such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm and resentments. We went over these at great length. Now, at great length means within this 3 or 4 hours. And then he finally asked me if I wanted these defects of character removed. When I said yes, we both knelt at his desk and prayed, each of us asking to have so they both did this together. They both said, please remove these defects. So it's not you must do this, it's we're going to do this. Each of us asking to have these defects taken away. And he goes off to Chicago and starts AA in Chicago. There you go. So, so don't be fooled by how a lot of recovery, it's all very gentle and very slow. That's one way of doing it. But it's not the only way of doing it. There are ways of approaching this rapidly to get some rapid results. Read the AA history books, because they'll tell you a lot. If you're starting a new fellowship, if you're in an SA is a relatively new fellowship, even SLA is a relatively new fellowship, relatively few meetings in London compared to AA. OA's in a similar position as well, with relatively few meetings compared to AA. It's still in its pioneering days. If you want to know how to run those fellowships successfully, don't look at what AA is doing at like 80 years. Look at what AA was doing at 10 years and 20 years, because they were going then through what you are going through now in those fellowships. You'll find much more useful information, I think. Because AA is big and complacent. I shouldn't say that on tape, but it is. There we go. So should we cover, and we've got about 25 minutes left, how to apply the traditions in the rest of our lives. So I'm going to start off, and I think you've got some experience on this as well, so I'm going to bring you.
There might be a question.
Oh, okay.
And that's one thing with the group again. We experience sometimes in groups that people, that really rude or destructive. How would you deal with people that are destructive? Because I had one experience, somebody he had a fight with the chair at the beginning. I didn't interrupt. I shared back that these behaviors don't belong in the meeting, it's dangerous to newcomers. And he tagged me afterwards in the meeting, and it's we didn't really know how to handle the situation, because he's sometimes causing trouble in meetings. So it's how to handle people that don't really think logical.
Okay. I haven't got a copy here, I should have brought one, but the AA, was it an AA group? NA. The AA service handbook, there are 2 handbooks on AA in Great Britain. One is a service handbook, one is a structure handbook. And I think it's the structure handbook has got how to deal with dangerous, difficult, harassing, predatory people in meetings. So there's a whole thing on there. But I'm going to cover some, so we can go and read that later. Do you have a pen and a piece of paper? Could you get a mailing list going? Then I can send a whole load of stuff out. And I can screenshot some of the stuff and put it in a folder online and give people links to it. But the principles, so Tradition 3 says you can't exclude someone from AA or NA or whatever. And this is something that sometimes people will use and say, you can't throw me out, I have a right to be here. And everyone thinks, oh dear, well, we're stuck with this bad behaviour because we can't throw this person out. Now, what Tradition 3 says is that the only requirement for membership of AA is a desire to stop drinking. It doesn't say the only requirement for attendance of this group is a desire to stop drinking. So you can't ban someone from AA but you can suspend someone's right to attend a group under tradition 1. So common welfare comes first. And if the common welfare is threatened by the behaviour, genuinely threatened by the behaviour of one person, then it's legitimate to exclude that person. Now you've got two types of disruptive person. You've got people who are, for whatever reason, right now malevolent. So they've got bad intent, they're aggressive, they're violent, they're angry, all of that. The other situation, you've just got someone who's drunk or high or stoned or mentally ill, and they don't mean any harm, but they're just really causing a problem. With that second type of person, where they're just drunk and they keep wanting to share every 4 seconds and they're tipping beer all over the floor and all of that sort of stuff, there's a page on Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers where it says because obviously if you've got a problem in AA or NA, I can guarantee they had that same problem in the 1930s, and they wrote down what they did. And what they did when they've got a drunk person, if the drunk person sits in the meeting sort of quietly shaking, that's absolutely fine. If they're disruptive, four people go and take this person, sit with them outside, have a mini meeting, so the person is kept within, hugged by the group, but they're prevented from disrupting the group. So the meeting can still take place, but you're still looking after the drunk person, so you're not excluding the drunk person. When someone is violent or malevolent, the responsibility, and this is under concept 1, lies with the whole group. So the whole group is responsible for dealing with it. But you've got an officer, let's say the secretary, at the front of the meeting, who's running the group. They're the ones who delegated the job to handle the crazy person. And one thing that you need to do, if you've got a group or something that I've done in groups which has worked really well, is you have a group conscience. If you regularly have a disruption or there's a risk, you know someone's on their way. Sometimes you know someone's on their way. Someone says they're going to come next week and cause trouble. You have a group conscience and you authorise the secretary to ask someone to pipe down. So it's not the person, it's not the AA member, it's the person saying, I've been asked on behalf of the group to maintain order, so I have the authority of the group. And that has a completely different effect. There's not one person against another, but the group has decided. And then if you've got someone who is potentially violent or dangerous, there was one, I belonged to, again, lesbian group many years ago, where four very aggressive lesbians were appointed as the bouncers. The gay men were hopeless. But those lesbians, they just went straight in. And they were at the ready for the secretary to say, right, you need to deal with. And they got up and they took the disruptive person out and sat with them. So they didn't sort of kick him out in the street. They sat and said, do you want to talk? You can't go in there because you're disrupting people. You're disrupting what is going on. But we'll sit and talk with you. Do you want to sit and talk with us until the end of the meeting? So that there is authority in the group, and there is a mechanism for handling the dangerous person, and there is no hesitation to call the police if necessary. So you and I had that. We had that at Brick Lane a few weeks ago, where we called the police at Fellowship, and a group of people supported me in doing it, and it was dealt with. But you need to have the group prepped for when that happens. And if you've got the structure manual, it really helps, because then it's the authority of AA behind you. It's not just one person's opinion. Does that help?
It really helps.
Good. Okay.
Hi, Jenny. I've got it. It's another bit. I'm sorry, I missed quite a lot of that. But I heard you say that you're about to go into how the traditions apply to the individual, or how you can implement them in your life. Because we were on Wednesday the 12 and 12 in Bethnal Green, and it's something that my sponsor was saying to me for quite a while. If you take out the AA from the traditions, it's like Jenny should be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions, and that's like self-supporting financially, emotionally, all this stuff. So I started to read that lady who gave the chair, the lady's pack that's from, I think, Al-Anon, and it's really, really interesting. But like, is that something in your experience? Like, can you, like, for example, I would love to be able to, like, apart from use the steps to work on my own conduct, to like bring that kind of ethos to like a band or work environment, like, and also to like human relationships, because I realise like all my human relationships still, even like I've gone through the steps and doing them again in another fellowship, that like I still can't implement those things like equality, do you know what I mean? So I expect that you're gonna like go through them. But it says in the traditions like about how either finding yourself being like the dominating, controlling person, or like the over-dependent. Like I'm like constantly in my life, in my relationships, I'm either like submitting to somebody else, wanting them to take responsibility for me, or I'm like taking responsibility for myself and then everybody else as well. And I would like to learn just how to be like, have more humility and more equality, and I think that starts with like interpersonal relationships. Maybe you could expand on that.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell a story. I've just been on holiday with some people. I'm going to tell a story about how some of us were in AA and some of us weren't, and we had a problem, and we solved it using the traditions. And it was like a textbook case of how to do it, and luckily we thought of it in time before the problem got too serious. It is just we could talk for hours about how to apply the traditions. They are how I handle relationships with other people. But the example was this. So a group of us are on holiday, a nice sunny destination, Costa del Sol, nothing too fancy. And we go out for dinner in the evening, of course, and most of the party wanted to eat at around 8 o'clock, 8:30, and go. Well, the sun was setting at 10 o'clock, so you want to be going to eat when there's still a little bit of dusk out. It's not completely pitch dark. All the restaurants are still open, but there was one person that would say, "Oh, I'll be ready at 8:30. I'll be ready at 9," and then 9:45. We're all looking at our watches. And we're looking over at this person who's just sort of sitting on the edge of the bed, and someone said, what is he doing over there? I don't know what he's doing over there. But anyway, what would happen every day is we wouldn't get to the restaurant till 10:15 or 10:30. And so we get back to the hotel completely exhausted at midnight, and just it was night after night this was happening. We hadn't agreed to eat at 10:30. It just kept happening. It was one person was dragging it out and dragging it out and dragging it out. And one of the party said, "Right, I'm not having this. I'm just going to go and eat on my own. If you want to come and eat with me at 8 o'clock, you can come and eat with me at 8 o'clock." And I thought, oh God, this is a disaster, because now this group of people is going to go off and eat at 8 o'clock. The people that want to eat at 11 o'clock are going to be pissed off at the people that are eating at 8 o'clock. We're going to end up with two groups of people, and everyone in the middle is going to have to choose, am I going to eat with Group A and piss off Group B, or am I going to eat with Group B and piss off Group A? It was a nightmare. And so there was a risk of everyone getting angry with everyone else and people having to pick sides. So we waited until we were all in the car together. And this is great because once the car, I made sure that we didn't start the conversation until the car was moving. So you see, once the car's moving, no one can get out, can they? At least not easily. So you think, well, this is a really good time to have a group conscience, isn't it? So the group conscience topic was raised. When, as a group, are we going to have dinner? And the idea, first of all, we said, I think it would be really great if we continued to all have dinner together for the rest of the holiday. That was the first thing we agreed. So tradition one, let's all stick together. Right, so that was agreed. And then someone said, well, I think it would be nicer to eat earlier, so when we get back from dinner, we've got time to unwind before we go to bed. And lots of the other voices said, yeah, that's what we'd like to do too. And the one person who was the reason why all this was being brought up in the first place was completely outmaneuvered. And we actually said, well, why do you want to eat so late? And he said, well, I like to go for a run in the evening. And we said, well, why don't you go for a run a bit earlier? And it was all brought out into the open. So rather than passive-aggressive behaviour and manipulation, people were forced to state what they wanted. They were forced to state what they needed. And then in Concept 12, it talks about discussion, vote, and substantial unanimity. And there was a bit of discussion about, well, should we eat at 8? Should we eat at 8:30? And we finally agreed. We got everyone to agree that we would leave for dinner at between 8 and 8:30. And one person said, and if I'm not ready, then I'll just catch you up later. And there was a bit of tension that night, but then the rest of the holiday was perfect and everyone abided by the group conscience and we managed to keep it together. Now, it's a stupid, tiny little example, but it's the principle of unity in Tradition 1. It's the principle of having a group conscience in Tradition 2 where everyone is forced to put out onto the table what they want, so there's no manipulation there, it's just communicated. And Concept 12, discussion, vote, substantial unanimity, completely solved the problem. Is that an example that sort of helps?
Yeah, it does. I think, I don't know, like, I mean, I've missed quite a lot of it, but yeah, it's that thing, isn't it, where, like, I agree with you, like, that's something I'm more likely to do, is, like, force people to have a discussion. But at the same time, like, I'm learning in the other program that I'm working, it's like, we've got to be communicative, so, you know, and in a calm way, which it sounds like it was, and let other people do what they want to do, which sounds like it did, and there is an overall agreement, which there was, but still I feel like how do you do that it was quite informal, like they were all shut in the car. Do you just have to be really strategic? Like I would start to guilt myself that I'm being manipulative. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. And then there's other sides of the thing that say like, oh, you should just, you know, like when it actually happens. Like I'm confused because like obviously AA says quite clearly like that, and then this other program that I'm doing sometimes is like, but you should just like express what you feel in the moment. And that's like saying to the person, say, when they were lagging behind, when it was actually happening, I'd like to eat sooner as an individual. So I'm confused, but I don't know.
The funny thing was we tried that latter thing and it didn't work. That's why we had to get in a group to discuss it. So it was the last thing we wanted to do, but it had to be done at the end of the day.
Sometimes it has to be done like that.
One of the main ways that I applied one of the main ways I applied the traditions, I don't know about anyone else, but I can get really wrapped up in work. And I can get my identity wrapped up in work. So if my work is going well, I feel great about myself. If my work is going badly, I feel terrible about myself. I can get wrapped up in my financial position. So if I'm earning well, I feel great about myself. If I'm earning badly, anything threatening my finances, anything threatening my job, it's a terrible problem. And there's a line on, it's page 288 of As Bill Sees It, which has got some very good readings in it, so I find it a very helpful book, where it says that almost every emotional upset comes from having an unhealthy emotional dependence and an associated demand. And what I've been taught to do is to do a couple of things. The first thing is Tradition 6. It says we mustn't lend the AA name to any outside activity or enterprise. So in my job, to stop me being attached to it, I used step 3 in Tradition 6. So step 3 says, I'm not working for myself, I'm going to have my own business, but I'm not working for myself, I'm working for my higher power. My higher power delegates down to me daily tasks to run my business, but it's not my business, it's God's business. And then it's no skin off my nose because I get the rewards of service from my higher power, not from my job. And my identity is I'm a creation of that higher power. I'm not my job, I'm not my background, I'm not my this, I'm not my financial position. So tradition 6 is all about detachment. So my primary purpose in tradition 5 is to serve and be helpful and be useful. And tradition 6, I'm not going to lend my name, which is my identity, to those things. And if I do anything well, this is where tradition 12 comes in, and I say that if I do something well because I have an ability, well, I didn't give myself that ability, so I'm not going to take the credit for it. And that's that's anonymity in practice. And I got tip-top. I've been helped by a lot of people over the years who actually actively apply the traditions in their life. And it's just like the steps you need to be taken through. You need to be shown how to apply the traditions in a situation. So some people have a tradition sponsor. Some people have a service sponsor who takes them through the concepts. And it's completely legitimate to do that, to have a sponsor for the steps and some other people you go to for traditions and concepts. But some people are just better on the traditions than others. But there's a wonderful woman in AA who's been sober in London, who's been sober since the early 70s, who had a business. She started her own business when she was a few years sober, and she was immensely successful. She made loads of money, but as with lots of businesses, certain things come into fashion and then they go out of fashion again. And the business that she ran just went out of fashion. There was no longer any demand for it. And she eventually shut it down. And she was at a meeting. She'd shared about it. It was at her home group. Everyone knew all about her life. And this woman went to her and she said, Pauline, I'm so impressed. And Pauline said, well, why are you impressed? Well, you failed, and yet you're still so cheerful. And she said, I haven't failed. The business has failed, but I'm not the business, so I haven't failed. I've shown up every day. I'm a complete success. And and it's the same with everything. If I lend my name to something external, if I lend my identity, my welfare, the source of my happiness, if I place anything like that outside myself, it's vulnerable. Because anything in the world is vulnerable. And then I'm going to have demands, and this mustn't be threatened. And that's where all the fear comes from. If my whole basis for living is I'm going to rely on my higher power, I'm going to say, higher power, you just give me the things you need me to do today to sort out all the stuff in my life. I'm going to get on with those to the best of my ability. And just like with a good employer, you'll get paid accordingly to how much work you do. It takes the pressure off, because then you're relying on God, and the channels may change, the jobs may change, the careers may change, the houses may change, the relationships may change, but the source, which is delivering all the good stuff to you through those different things, doesn't change. And then you can be completely secure. And that's what that's one of the things that the traditions are all about. Those are the principles behind the traditions. And the other, just one last thing before I open it up again, and we've only got a few more minutes, so maybe 5 more minutes before we close up and could we get a pot as well to pass the pot if we don't have a yes, I'm going to bring in some Al-Anon stuff if I may. A friend of mine, and if you're upset by profanity, then just close your ears now. He says the Al-Anon program boils down to minding your own fucking business and keeping your big fat mouth shut. And in tradition 10, it says, I have no opinion on outside issues. And I try and apply, when I can, tradition 10 in my life and say, I have no opinion on outside issues. What's an outside issue? Anything that doesn't bear on how I'm serving my higher power today. Which frees up the whole afternoon, it frees up the whole week. Because my mind will naturally look for all the things that everyone else is doing wrong and come up with how everyone else should be living. That's my basic way of operating without a program. And in tradition 4, it tells me how to have boundaries with other people, which means, like, in my relationship with I've been with someone for 13 years. He's got his own life. I've got my own life. If we want to do stuff together, we do stuff together. And it's tradition, form, practice. I'm autonomous. I can do what I want as long as it doesn't affect someone else. He can do what he wants as long as it doesn't affect anyone else. What he does in his life, none of my business. What I do in my life, none of his business. We have a joint life together, and on that we have the group conscience. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? But it means you maintain, even in a relationship, and this is the answer to lots of the sex and love stuff, is that you maintain your own private domain, and you are allowed to have this private domain, and you are not obliged to answer questions about it. You're not obliged to disclose everything just because you're in a friendship or a relationship with someone. You are allowed that private domain, and that will free up lots of space emotionally inside, in my experience. So I think I hope that's a little bit of a fly into what the traditions can do. Any other last thoughts that people have?
Yeah, Joe Alcoholic, just wanted to add, first of all, when I started to read this book, Traditions, and for sponsors and sponsees, it was a really simple thing of know the short form of each tradition, so learn them. And I realised that I hadn't learnt them, so I won't know how to apply them if I have to keep looking at a book and I don't know them. So to learn it, to learn the tradition that you're working on, so have that in your mind, and then work with the questions that are sort of presented to you through that. And there's 4 or 5 different areas, like work, family, things like that. The other thing was coming back to, I think, going through the steps. Step 10, it talks about love and tolerance is our code. Going back to your share, if you don't mind me cross-sharing, I actually have had that experience too. How do I bring this? First of all, I didn't know the tradition, so I'm trying to bring something into it that I don't know, so I'm flying blind, as it were. Secondly, if I go to any situation with fear or think I'm going to be manipulative, I'm usually, subconsciously, I'm manifesting that. So I have to go to it with a sense of, like, the first 3 traditions, knowing that the outcome is nothing to do with me. If that group conscious has been taken, if you can bring something to a group, say like a family group or a work group or something, if I'm taking a suggestion and it's done within that group conscious, like was done on the bus, the outcome has to be literally none of my business, because it's the second tradition that's been, like, that's what I'm understanding it. I don't know if anybody else has any can elaborate on that, but that's how I kind of, when I'm going into something fearfully or trying to get an outcome of a specific outcome, the one that I think's right, again, it's not the group conscience, is it? So I guess knowing very little about the traditions, trying to learn, I don't actually, I think I probably do know more than I sort of say, but subconsciously it's like, how do I actually activate that within a situation? And until I know it, I don't think I can activate it. I need to learn it and understand what the meaning behind the tradition is. And I was going to ask about tradition 10 but you just covered it. What is an outside issue, not within a group, but outside in the world, because there's a lot of things going on and disturbances around things, like, what's going on. And then it's like, well, part of me is like, not who am I, but how do I get to be useful in that situation without having an opinion on it? And I kind of know what to do, like keep my big fat mouth shut and whatever, but it's like, how can I really be useful? So you kind of covered it, I get it. I think it's time, isn't it, and learning. And one other question I had was if anybody has ever sort of approached the traditions and wanted to go through them or started, if anyone has any suggestions or ideas on how to make a start. Really, that's it. Yeah.
Anyone else want to add anything? I can send out on the mailing list some worksheets on the traditions, which have got lots of ideas and quotations taken from lots of different sources. And one thing that occurred to me based on what both of you were sharing, is when you're discussing things in a group, so you're applying the whole group conscience thing with people. 2 tips I was given. One was an Al-Anon one. It's an Al-Anon slogan called WAIT, which is, why am I talking? And the long version of that is, when you're considering whether to say something in a group conscience, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now? And that knocks 9 out of 10 things I consider contributing. And the third one is another Al-Anon slogan, which is really helpful in a group situation, is say, how important is it? And only, not to make a burning issue out of small things, but only to launch in on when it's really important. And that really helps in group situations, in my experience. Good. Shall we pass the pot?
Thanks.